At Christmas, my wife's mother proudly introduced a new man to my wife. "This is your wife's new husband. You contribute nothing to this family pack and leave." I smiled sweetly. "By the way, the house and company is in my name, not hers." The room froze. The snow had started falling 3 days before Christmas, not the gentle, picturesque kind you see on holiday cards. The sort that floats down like confetti made of light, but the heavy, persistent kind that buried the driveway under 8 inches of wet silence. I stood at the living room window of our Connecticut home, watching the flakes accumulate on the branches of the oak tree I'd planted the year we moved in. 7 years ago now. The tree had grown tall enough that its highest branches reached past the second-floor windows, and in summer, its leaves made shadows that danced across our bedroom ceiling. Our bedroom, except lately it had been just my bedroom. Natalie had taken to sleeping in the guest room on the third floor, claiming that she needed space to think, space to breathe, space to figure out who she was outside of being Mrs. Jonathan Hayes. That's what she'd said 3 months ago, standing in this very spot, her arms crossed over her chest like she was holding herself together. "I need to rediscover myself, John." I'd nodded because what else do you do when the woman you've loved for 9 years tells you she's lost somewhere inside the life you've built together? You don't argue. You don't fight. You give them space, because that's what love is supposed to do. It's supposed to be patient. It's supposed to be kind. It's supposed to wait. So I waited. I worked late at the office, managing the construction firm my father had left me when he died. I came home to empty rooms and reheated dinners. I slept alone in a bed that still smelled faintly of her perfume, that expensive French one she'd discovered during our honeymoon in Paris. And I told myself this was temporary. A phase, a rough patch every marriage goes through. My phone buzzed on the windowsill, a text from Natalie. "Mom wants us to come to Greenwich for Christmas Eve. The whole family will be there. We should go." Greenwich, her mother's estate, the sprawling colonial mansion where Natalie had grown up, surrounded by hedge funds and country clubs, and the kind of old money that wore its wealth like a second skin, quiet, understated, and utterly impenetrable to outsiders like me. I typed back, "Sounds good. What time?" 3 dots appeared, danced, disappeared, appeared again. She says 6, cocktails first, dinner at 7:30. "And John?" "Yeah, wear the navy suit, the one she bought you." I looked down at my phone at those words sitting there like a command from on high, and something cold settled in my chest. Not anger, not quite. Just a recognition of something I'd been trying not to see for months. The navy suit, the one Barbara, Natalie's mother, had purchased for me last Christmas because, as she'd said with that smile that never reached her eyes, "Every man needs at least one properly tailored suit, Jonathan, even if he works with his hands." I'd worn it exactly twice. Once to her birthday party in March, once to her annual summer gala in July. Both times I'd felt like a child playing dress-up, squeezed into someone else's idea of what I should be. "I'll find it," I typed. The truth was, I knew exactly where it was, hanging in the closet in our bedroom, still in the garment bag from the tailor, next to the tie I'd worn to our wedding, and the sport coat I'd bought myself for client meetings. My own clothes, the jeans and flannel shirts and work boots I actually wore, lived in a different closet now. The one in the guest room where I'd started keeping my things after Natalie had reorganized our space into something that looked like a spread from Architectural Digest but felt nothing like home. I set the phone down and returned my gaze to the window. The snow was still falling. Christmas Eve arrived with the kind of cold that makes your breath hang in the air like evidence of your own existence. Natalie had left early, claiming she wanted to help her mother prepare for the party. I'd offered to come with her, but she'd waved me off with a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. "You'd just be in the way, hun. Come at 6. I'll see you there." So at 5:30, I climbed into my truck, the F-150 I'd bought when the company started turning a real profit, and made the 40-minute drive to Greenwich in silence. No radio, no podcasts, just the sound of tires on wet pavement and the occasional scrape of the windshield wipers against ice. The Bradford estate sat at the end of a private road lined with bare maples and old money discretion. You couldn't see the house from the main road, which was precisely the point. Privacy wasn't just valued here, it was currency. I pulled up the circular driveway and parked between a Mercedes and a Tesla, both of which probably cost more than my annual salary. The house loomed ahead, all white columns and black shutters and windows that glowed with the kind of warm golden light that only exists in the homes of people who've never had to worry about the heating bill. I sat in the truck for a moment, engine idling, watching the shadows move across those windows. Somewhere in there was my wife. Somewhere in there was her mother. Somewhere in there was whatever this evening was actually going to be about. Because I'd learned over the years that Barbara Bradford never did anything without purpose. Every dinner party was a chess move. Every seating arrangement was strategic. Every invitation carried weight. I killed the engine and grabbed the bottle of wine I'd brought, a 1998 Bordeaux that had cost me $300 and 2 phone calls to a sommelier friend who owed me a favor. It was the kind of wine Barbara would appreciate, which meant it was the kind of wine that might buy me a few minutes of approval before the evening inevitably turned into another reminder of everything I wasn't. The front door opened before I could knock. Natalie stood in the doorway, backlit by the chandelier in the foyer, and for a moment, just a moment, I remembered why I'd fallen in love with her. She was wearing a red dress that hugged her curves in all the places I used to know by heart. Her dark hair swept up in a way that exposed the elegant line of her neck, and her smile, though it didn't quite reach her eyes, was the same smile she'd given me across a crowded bar 9 years ago when I'd worked up the courage to introduce myself. "You made it," she said, and I couldn't tell if she was relieved or disappointed. "Wouldn't miss it," I replied, holding up the wine. "For your mother." Something flickered across her face. "She'll love that." She stepped aside to let me in, and I entered the house that had never felt like home, even though I'd spent countless holidays and weekends here over the years. The foyer smelled like pine and cinnamon and money, that particular scent of fresh flowers and expensive candles and furniture polish on antiques worth more than most people's homes. "Everyone's in the living room," Natalie said, already turning away from me. "We're doing cocktails before dinner. Mom made her famous champagne punch." Her famous champagne punch. Of course. I followed her through the hallway, past the oil paintings of Bradford ancestors who stared down at me with expressions that ranged from mild disdain to outright suspicion. Past the console table where a massive flower arrangement sat like a declaration of wealth. Past the mirror where I caught a glimpse of myself in the navy suit that still didn't fit quite right across the shoulders because I'd built those shoulders hauling lumber and pouring concrete, not sitting in boardrooms making deals. The living room opened before us like a stage set. 20-some people were scattered across the space, holding crystal glasses and wearing the kind of casual elegance that only comes from generations of practice. I recognized most of them. Natalie's father, Charles, holding court near the fireplace, her brother, Preston, and his wife, Ainsley, perched on the white sofa like matching bookends, her Aunt Cordelia, draped in diamonds and judgment, various cousins and family friends whose names I'd long since given up trying to remember. And there in the center of it all, like a queen surveying her kingdom, was Barbara Bradford. She was 73 but looked 55, thanks to what I assumed was a combination of excellent genes, expensive skincare, and possibly some very discreet work by a very discreet surgeon. Her silver hair was cut in a sharp bob that somehow managed to be both severe and elegant. She wore black, she always wore black to her Christmas party, claiming it made the other women's dresses pop, and pearls that had probably been in her family since before the Civil War. Her eyes found mine across the room. She smiled. "Jonathan," she called out, her voice cutting through the murmur of conversation like a knife through butter. "How lovely of you to join us. And only fashionably late this time. Well done." Laughter rippled through the room, polite, measured. The kind of laughter that acknowledges a joke without actually finding it funny. I smiled back and raised the wine bottle. "Brought this for you, Barbara. Thought you might enjoy it." She glided across the room, and she did glide, never merely walked, and took the bottle from my hands. Her fingers were cool against mine. "A 98 Bordeaux," she said, examining the label with the kind of attention most people reserve for legal documents. "How thoughtful." The pause before thoughtful was calculated. Everything Barbara did was calculated. "Jonathan, you remember everyone, don't you?" "Of course you do. Come, let me get you a drink." "You look like you could use one." She linked her arm through mine, a gesture that would have seemed affectionate to anyone who didn't know better, and steered me toward the bar that had been set up in the corner. A young woman in a black vest and bow tie stood ready to serve. "Whiskey," I said. "Neat. Make it a double," Barbara added, patting my arm. "It's Christmas after all." The bartender poured a generous measure of what I recognized as a 25-year-old scotch into a cut crystal tumbler. I accepted it with a nod of thanks and took a sip, letting the warmth spread through my chest. "So," Barbara said, still holding my arm like we were co-conspirators in some elaborate scheme, "Natalie tells me the business is doing well." "We had a good year," I replied carefully. "Finished 3 major projects. Broke ground on 2 more. The team's grown to 45 people now." "How industrious." She sipped her champagne punch. "And the house, everything running smoothly?" The house, our house, the 4-bedroom colonial in Westport that Natalie and I had bought 3 years ago. The one with the oak tree I'd planted and the kitchen I'd renovated myself and the mortgage that still had 23 years left on it. "Everything's fine," I said. "Hmm." Barbara's eyes drifted across the room to where Natalie stood talking to her brother. "You know, Jonathan, I've been thinking." Here it comes, I thought, whatever this evening was actually about. This whole arrangement you and Natalie have, living in that little house in Westport, you working all hours at that construction company, it's very quaint, but one does wonder if it's sustainable. I took another sip of scotch. "We're happy. Are you?" The question hung in the air between us, sharp and surgical. Before I could answer, Charles Bradford appeared at my elbow, his hand extended. "John, good to see you. How's the construction business?" "Still building those townhouses in Stamford?" I shook his hand, grateful for the interruption. "Finished those last month. We're starting a mixed-use development in Norwalk next spring." "Excellent, excellent." Charles was nothing like his wife, warm where she was cold, genuine where she was calculated. He'd made his money in commercial real estate and understood the construction business in a way Barbara never would. "You know, if you ever need investors for a project, you should talk to me. I like what you're doing." "I appreciate that, Charles. I mean it. You're building real value, not just chasing the next flip. That takes vision." Barbara's grip on my arm tightened infinitesimally. "Darling, don't bore Jonathan with business talk. It's Christmas." Right, right," Charles winked at me. "Enjoy the party, John." He drifted away, and I was left alone with Barbara again. "Such a sweet man," she murmured. "Absolutely no sense of appropriate boundaries. Business at a Christmas party. Can you imagine?" I could imagine it just fine, actually. It was one of the few conversations I'd had at these gatherings that didn't feel like navigating a minefield. "Barbara, I should go say hello to—" "Oh, before I forget." She tightened her grip on my arm, preventing my escape. "I have a surprise for everyone tonight. After dinner. I think you'll find it particularly illuminating." Something in her tone made the scotch turn cold in my stomach. "A surprise?" "Nothing terrible, I assure you, just a little Christmas gift for the whole family." She finally released my arm and patted my cheek like I was a child. "Now run along, mingle, and do try to smile, Jonathan. You look like you're attending a funeral." I watched her glide away back to her position at the center of the room, and I wondered, not for the first time on, what I'd gotten myself in by marrying into this family. The answer, I was beginning to suspect, was far more than I'd bargained for. Dinner was served at 7:30 sharp. The dining room was a masterpiece of holiday elegance. The mahogany table stretched nearly the length of the room, draped in white linen and set with china, so delicate I was afraid to breathe on it. Crystal stemware caught the light from the chandelier overhead, throwing tiny rainbows across the walls. In the center, an elaborate arrangement of white roses and evergreen branches ran the length of the table, punctuated by silver candelabras that probably cost more than my first car. I was seated, and I was certain this was Barbara's doing, directly across from Natalie and next to Cordelia, who spent the entire first course explaining in excruciating detail why her recent trip to the Amalfi Coast had been acceptable but not exceptional, due to the simply dreadful quality of the tourists these days. Natalie barely looked at me. She was animated in a way I hadn't seen in months, laughing at Preston's jokes and touching her mother's hand when Barbara said something particularly amusing. She glowed in the candlelight, and I felt like I was watching her through a window, close enough to see everything, too far away to reach. The meal progressed through its courses with the precision of a military operation. Oysters on the half shell, butternut squash bisque, duck breast with a cherry reduction. Each dish was presented with a flourish, each wine was poured with ceremony, and each course brought us closer to whatever Barbara's surprise was going to be. I noticed that she kept checking her watch, small, discreet glances, the kind most people wouldn't catch. But I'd spent enough time around Barbara Bradford to recognize when she was waiting for something. Dessert arrived, individual chocolate soufflés that collapsed the moment you touched them with a spoon, releasing a molten center that tasted like sin and regret. Before we retired to the living room for coffee and cordials, Barbara announced. Rising from her seat at the head of the table, I have a special announcement to make. The room fell silent. Everyone turned to look at her, and I saw it then, the predatory gleam in her eyes, the satisfaction of a plan coming together, the triumph of someone who holds all the cards and knows exactly when to play them. As you all know, she continued, family is everything to me. The Bradford name, our legacy, our traditions, these are the things that matter. These are the things that endure. She paused, letting her words settle over the table like snow. Which is why I'm so pleased to announce that we have a special guest joining us this evening. Someone who represents the future of our family. Someone who understands what it truly means to be a Bradford. My stomach dropped. Natalie, darling, would you like to do the honors? I turned to look at my wife. She was smiling. Actually smiling. Not the tight, practiced smile she wore at these gatherings, but a real smile, the kind that reached her eyes. Mom, She glanced at me, and for just a second I saw something in her expression. Guilt, apology, or maybe just the acknowledgement of what was about to happen. Then she looked away. Everyone, Barbara said, moving toward the doorway that led to the foyer, I'd like you to meet someone very special. She opened the door. A man walked in. He was tall, taller than me by several inches. Well-built in the way that comes from expensive gyms and personal trainers, not from physical labor. Mid-30s maybe. Dark hair swept back from a face that belonged in a cologne advertisement. He wore a suit that probably cost more than I made in a month, and he moved with the kind of easy confidence that comes from never having been told no. He went straight to Natalie. She stood, and they embraced. Not a polite hug, a real embrace, the kind that speaks of familiarity, of intimacy, the kind that made my hands clench around my napkin. Everyone, Barbara announced, her voice ringing with triumph, this is Richard Ashford. Richard and Natalie met at the Symphony Gala last September. He's a managing partner at Kensington Capital. I'm sure Charles knows the firm, and he comes from a wonderful family in Boston. Dartmouth, followed by Harvard Business School. Absolutely impeccable credentials. She paused, and in that pause, I heard everything she wasn't saying. Unlike you, Jonathan, unlike your state school education and your working class background and your construction company that, while successful, will never be impressive to people like us. Richard, Barbara continued, has been getting to know our Natalie over the past few months, and I must say, they make the most wonderful couple. The room erupted in murmurs. I looked at Natalie. She wouldn't meet my eyes. I know this might come as a surprise to some of you, Barbara said, and her gaze landed on me like a spotlight. But sometimes change is necessary. Sometimes we need to acknowledge when something isn't working and make room for something better. She walked to where I sat, placed her hand on my shoulder. Jonathan, you've been adequate. As a husband, as a provider. You've tried, I'll give you that. But trying isn't the same as succeeding, is it? And Natalie deserves more than adequate. She deserves exceptional. The hand on my shoulder felt like a weight. So I'm making things simple for you, dear. This is your new husband, she gestured to Richard, who had his arm around Natalie's waist now. Or rather, he will be once the divorce is finalized. We've already spoken to the lawyers. It should all be very straightforward. And you, she patted my shoulder, you contribute nothing to this family. So pack your things and leave. The silence that followed was absolute. 20-some people stared at me, waiting to see what I would do, how I would react, whether I would make a scene or go quietly into the night like a good little nobody. I set down my napkin, slowly, carefully. I stood and Barbara took a step back, likely expecting me to either explode in anger or crumple in shame. I did neither. Instead, I smiled. It wasn't a bitter smile. It wasn't even an angry smile. It was the smile of someone who's been playing a different game all along and has finally been given permission to reveal their hand. Barbara, I said, my voice perfectly calm, perfectly pleasant. That's a lovely speech. Really, very dramatic. I'm sure you practiced it. Her eyes narrowed. But before I pack anything, I think there's something you should know. I turned to address the whole table. Something everyone should know, actually. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out my phone. The house, I said, our house, the one Natalie and I live in. The beautiful colonial in Westport with the oak tree in the front yard and the renovated kitchen in the 4 bedrooms. The one worth about $2 million now, give or take. I pulled up a document on my phone, a PDF I'd saved months ago when I'd first started to suspect where all of this was heading. It's not in Natalie's name. I looked at my wife, who had gone very pale. It's in mine, solely mine. I bought it before we got married, and I kept it in my name. The deed, the title, everything. Jonathan Robert Hayes, that's what it says. Barbara's smile had frozen on her face. And the business, I continued, my voice still perfectly even. Hayes Construction, the company that employs 45 people and does about $15 million in revenue annually, the one with contracts lined up through the next 2 years. I turned my phone screen to show them the company registration documents. Also in my name, not Natalie's, mine. I started it with money my father left me. I built it from nothing. And I made very sure when we got married that it remained separate property. My lawyer insisted, said it was smart business, keeping personal and professional assets separate. I looked at Richard Ashford, who was beginning to look like he'd walked into something he hadn't been prepared for. So here's the situation, I said, pocketing my phone. If Natalie wants a divorce, and it seems like she does, that's fine. I won't contest it. But she won't be getting the house. She won't be getting the business. She won't be getting anything except what she came into the marriage with, which, if I recall correctly, was about $30,000 in credit card debt that I paid off in our first year together. The room was so quiet I could hear the candles flickering. As for contributing nothing to this family, I looked directly at Barbara. I think you'll find that the house you're standing in, this beautiful estate, had some foundation work done about 5 years ago. Serious foundation work. The kind that costs $500,000 when you hire the right people to do it properly and discreetly. Barbara's face had gone from smug to stricken. I did that work, Barbara. At cost. Saved your family about $200,000. Didn't charge for my time. Didn't make a fuss about it. Just did it because Natalie asked me to help her parents. I turned back to Natalie. I also paid for your mother's birthday trip to Paris last year. The one where you all stayed at the Ritz and went to that Michelin 3-star restaurant every night. $35,000. Charged it to my personal card because your father was having some temporary liquidity issues. Charles had the decency to look embarrassed. Paid for Preston's wedding, or at least half of it, $90,000. Paid for the renovations on Aunt Cordelia's townhouse in Manhattan, $75,000. Paid for, that's enough, Barbara snapped. No, I said quietly, I don't think it is, because you just stood here and told me I contribute nothing. You invited this man, I gestured to Richard, into your home to replace me like I'm a piece of furniture you're tired of. You orchestrated this whole thing to humiliate me in front of your entire family. I looked around the table at all of them. But you forgot something. You forgot that I'm not some charity case you took in. I'm not as some project you get to discard when something shinier comes along. I'm a successful businessman who's been subsidizing this family's lifestyle for years because I loved my wife and wanted her to be happy. Natalie was crying now, silent tears running down her face. So here's what's going to happen, I said. I'm going to leave. I'm going to go home, to my home, and I'm going to start proceedings to remove Natalie from the property. Then I'm going to call my lawyer and make sure that every penny I've put into helping this family is properly accounted for. Every gift, every loan, every time I did work at cost or for free. I pulled on my coat, which I draped over the back of my chair. And Barbara, that 1998 Bordeaux I brought you, it was $300. Consider it a farewell gift. I won't be bringing wine to any more of your parties. I walked toward the door, and not a single person tried to stop me. At the threshold, I paused and looked back. "Merry Christmas," I said. Then I walked out of that house and into the snow, and I didn't look back. Behind me, I could hear the explosion of voices, shock, outrage, someone, probably Cordelia, demanding an explanation. But I didn't care. I climbed into my truck, started the engine, and sat there for a moment, watching the house through the falling snow. The room was still frozen, just like I left it. And somewhere in there, Natalie was learning the difference between what her mother had promised her and what reality actually looked like. I pulled out of the driveway and headed home, to my house, my actual house. The one that was mine, had always been mine, and would remain mine no matter what happened next. The house was dark when I got home. I didn't turn on the lights. I walked through the rooms I'd lived in for 7 years, the rooms I'd painted and repaired and renovated with my own hands, and I let myself feel the weight of what had just happened. Not the humiliation. I'd expected that, in a way. Barbara had been building to something like this for years. No, what I felt was something else. Something colder and clearer. Relief. I'd been released from pretending that Natalie's family accepted me, from pretending that our marriage was still the partnership it had been in those early years, from pretending that love was enough to bridge the gap between who I was and who Barbara Bradford thought I should be. I poured myself a drink, good whiskey this time, not the expensive scotch I drank at Barbara's to prove I could appreciate it, and sat in the dark living room, watching the snow fall through the window. My phone buzzed, a text from Natalie, "We need to talk." I stared at those 4 words for a long moment, then set the phone down without responding. It buzzed again. "Please, John, I can explain." And again, "It's not what you think." I picked up the phone and typed, "What I think is that you've been seeing Richard Ashford since September. What I think is that you and your mother planned this entire humiliation. What I think is that our marriage ended months ago, but nobody bothered to tell me. How am I doing?" The 3 dots appeared, danced, disappeared, appeared again. Finally, "Can I come home? We need to talk in person." I looked around the dark house. "This isn't your home anymore. Get a hotel. I'll have my lawyer contact you in the morning." The dots appeared again, but didn't turn into words. After a minute, they disappeared. I finished my drink and went upstairs to bed. To my bed, in my house. I didn't sleep. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, and thought about the last 9 years. I'd met Natalie at a charity event I'd attended with one of my clients. I was 28, running a crew of 6 guys and starting to think about branching out on my own. She was 25, fresh out of graduate school with a degree in art history and a job at a gallery in Greenwich that her mother had arranged for her. We talked for 3 hours that night about art, about architecture, about the difference between building something that would last and building something that just looked good in photos. She'd been fascinated by the idea of construction as craft, of creating spaces where people would live and work and make memories. She'd asked me about my favorite projects, and I told her about the Victorian I'd helped restore in Old Greenwich, how we'd matched the original crown molding inch for inch, how we'd found period-appropriate hardware at a salvage yard in Maine. "You're an artist," she had said. "You just work in wood and stone instead of paint." I'd fallen in love with her right then. 3 months later, I'd proposed on a beach in Rhode Island, with a ring I'd saved for months to buy. She'd said yes with tears in her eyes, and I'd thought I was the luckiest man alive. The wedding had been a Bradford family production. 200 guests, a 5-tier cake, a string quartet. Barbara had handled everything, insisted on it. "Actually, you've done enough, Jonathan, building that lovely business. Let me give my daughter the wedding she deserves." I'd agreed because Natalie had wanted it and because I'd thought it was a gesture of acceptance. Barbara Bradford, approving of me enough to throw her daughter an elaborate wedding. I'd been so naive. The first few years had been good, great even. Natalie had kept working at the gallery. I'd started Hayes Construction. We'd bought this house, I'd bought this house, and spent weekends making it ours. She'd pick out paint colors. I'd install the light fixtures she found at antique shops. We'd cook together in the kitchen I'd renovated, drink wine on the back patio I'd built, make love in every room like we were christening our future. When had it changed? I tried to pinpoint the exact moment, but it was more like a slow erosion, little things that accumulated over time. Natalie spending more time with her mother, more dinners in Greenwich, more shopping trips to Manhattan, more charity galas and symphony performances and wine tastings with the right people. Me working longer hours as the business grew, more time on job sites, more client meetings, more evenings when I'd come home exhausted and covered in sawdust, and she'd already be asleep in the guest room because I'd disturbed her the night before. She'd stopped asking about my day. I'd stopped sharing it. We'd become strangers sharing a house, except it wasn't her house to share. It was mine. And in about 6 hours, I was going to make sure everyone knew it. At 7:30 a.m., I called Marcus Chen. Marcus had been my lawyer since I'd started the business. He was smart, aggressive, and absolutely ruthless when it came to protecting his client's interests. He was also the one who'd insisted I keep the house and the business in my name when I'd gotten married. It's not romantic, he'd said, but it's smart. You're building assets, John, real assets. If things go south, you need to protect what's yours. I thought he was being paranoid. Now I was grateful. John, Marcus answered on the second ring. Merry Christmas Eve. Or did it just become unmerry? That obvious? You don't call me at 7:30 in the morning unless something's on fire. What happened? I told him. All of it. The dinner party, Barbara's announcement, Richard Ashford, the humiliation, my exit. Marcus was quiet for a long moment when I finished. Jesus, he finally said. That's some Shakespearean-level family drama. Can we move fast on this? I want Natalie out of the house, and I want to make sure she can't claim any interest in the business or the property. The prenup covers most of that, Marcus said. I heard him typing. But we'll need to file for divorce immediately and get a court order for her to vacate the property. Since it's your separate property, purchased before marriage, she has no claim to it. The business is the same, started with inherited money, kept separate from marital assets. What about all the money I've put into helping her family? More typing. Those were gifts, technically. Unless you have written agreements that they were loans, it's hard to reclaim them. I have documentation, I said. Every transfer, every check, every time I did work at cost. I'm meticulous about that stuff. Of course you are. I could hear the smile in Marcus's voice. Send me everything. Dates, amounts, nature of the transaction. If we can establish a pattern of financial contribution that benefited her family while she was, what's the legal term I'm looking for? Ah yes, fucking someone else behind your back. That strengthens our position. How long will this take? I can file the initial papers today. Judge won't review them until after Christmas, but we can have everything ready to go. In Connecticut, assuming she doesn't contest. She will, I interrupted, or her mother will make her. Then we're looking at several months, maybe a year if they drag it out. But John, you're in a very strong position here. Separate property, no kids. And if you can prove she was in an affair while you were supporting her family financially, most judges won't look kindly on that. Do it, I said. File everything. I want her out of this house by New Year's. Consider it done. I'll send you a retainer agreement this morning. And John, well, yeah, I'm sorry, man. I know this isn't easy. It's easier than I thought it would be. I admitted. That's the weird part. We hung up, and I spent the next 3 hours going through my files, pulling every document that showed money I'd transferred to Natalie or her family. The foundation work on Barbara's estate, the trip to Paris, Preston's wedding, Cordelia's renovations, every Christmas gift, every birthday present, every time I'd quietly paid for something because it was easier than dealing with the drama of saying no. It added up to just over $600,000 over 9 years. $600,000 I'd spent trying to prove I was good enough. I sent it all to Marcus in a single encrypted email, then sat back and waited. Natalie showed up at 3 o'clock. I watched her pull into the driveway in her BM, the one I'd co-signed for her, I remembered suddenly, which meant it would need to be dealt with too, and walk up to the front door like she still lived here. She tried her key. I'd had the locks changed at 10 a.m. There was a pause, then the doorbell rang. I waited a full minute before answering. She looked terrible. Still beautiful, she couldn't help that, but terrible. Her eyes were red and swollen. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail. She wore jeans and an old Yale sweatshirt I'd bought her years ago. And she looked younger than her 34 years. Vulnerable. I reminded myself that vulnerability was not the same as innocence. "Hi," she said softly. "Hi." We stood there on opposite sides of the threshold. Me inside, her outside. "Can I come in?" she asked. "No." She flinched like I'd slapped her. "John, please. We need to talk about this." "There's nothing to talk about. My lawyer is filing for divorce this afternoon. You'll be served with papers after Christmas. You have until New Year's to get your things out of the house." "This is my home. It's my house," I corrected gently. "It's always been my house. You lived here. That's not the same thing." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "You can't just throw me out." "I can, actually. It's my property. We're not married anymore, or we won't be soon enough. You have no legal right to be here. But all my things, which you'll have plenty of time to collect." "I'm not a monster, Natalie. I'm just done being a doormat." She wrapped her arms around herself. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this." "How was it supposed to happen?" I leaned against the doorframe. "You and your mother were going to what, exactly? Spring Richard on me, expect me to just slink away quietly, move out of my own house so he could move in?" "I didn't know she was going to do that," Natalie said. "The whole Christmas dinner thing. I thought she was just going to introduce him, to ease everyone into the idea that things were changing." "When did it start?" I asked. "You and Richard. The truth this time." She looked down at her hands. "September, like Mom said. We met at the gala." "And you've been seeing him since then?" A nod. "Sleeping with him?" Another nod, smaller this time. I felt nothing. That was the strangest part. I'd expected anger or hurt or betrayal, but instead I just felt empty, like I'd already grieved this loss months ago without realizing it. "Why didn't you just tell me?" I asked. "Why do it like this?" "Because I was scared," she whispered. "I didn't know how, and Mom said, she said she'd handle it. She said she'd make it easy. By humiliating me in front of your entire family." "I didn't think she'd do it that way. I swear, John, I just thought, you thought you could have your cake and eat it too at first." I finished. "Keep living in this house, keep the lifestyle, but swap me out for someone your mother actually approved of. Someone with the right pedigree and the right connections and the right tax bracket. That's not fair. Isn't it?" I straightened up. "Your mother's been trying to get rid of me since the day we got engaged. The only reason she tolerated me at all was because I was useful. I could fix her foundation, pay for her parties, bankroll your family's lifestyle while pretending to be grateful for the privilege. My family doesn't need your money. Your father declared bankruptcy 3 years ago," I interrupted. "Did you know that?" Chapter 11, restructured his whole commercial real estate portfolio. He only kept the Greenwich house because I helped him refinance. Put up half the money myself as a loan that he's never paid back." Natalie went very still. "What?" "Your family is broke, Nat, or close to it. Old money that's been bleeding out for years, and they've been too proud to admit it. Why do you think Barbara was so eager to set you up with Richard Ashford? Kensington Capital? That's a lifeline, a way back to the top." "You're lying." "I wish I was." I pulled out my phone and showed her the documentation. Loan agreement signed by her father. Financial statements showing the Bradford family's actual net worth, which was considerably less impressive than their lifestyle suggested. "Your father and I had an understanding. I'd help keep the estate afloat, and he'd never tell Barbara how bad things really were. Worked out well for everyone, until now." Natalie stared at the screen, her face going pale. "So, congratulations," I said, pocketing the phone. You're trading one ATM for another. Hope Richard knows what he's getting into. I loved you, she said, and her voice cracked on the words. I did, John. I still do, I think. I'm so confused. You love the idea of me, I corrected. The guy who was going to prove to Mommy that you could make your own choices. But the minute she offered you an upgrade, you took it. And you know what? I don't blame you. I really don't. I started to close the door. Wait, Natalie said, putting her hand against it. What happens now? Now you go back to Greenwich and plan your new life with Richard. I'll have Marcus send over the divorce papers. We'll split whatever actual marital assets there are, which isn't much since I kept everything separate, and we'll go our separate ways. And us? Just, that's it? I looked at her, this woman I'd loved for 9 years, and I felt the weight of all those years settle on my shoulders. The dinners we'd shared, the trips we'd taken, the quiet Sunday mornings when we'd read the paper in bed, the fights and the makeups and the slow gradual realization that love wasn't always enough. Yeah, I said softly. That's it. I closed the door. She stood on the porch for a long time. I could see her shadow through the frosted glass before finally walking back to her car. I watched her drive away, and I thought about all the ways a marriage can end. This wasn't the worst way, I supposed, but it wasn't the best either. It was just over. Christmas Day passed in a blur of silence. I didn't call anyone. Nobody called me. I assumed Natalie had told her family about the locks being changed and the divorce papers being filed, and I assumed they were all in Greenwich, circling the wagons and trying to figure out their next move. I spent the day working on the house. There's something meditative about physical labor, about taking a space that's broken and making it whole again. I'd been meaning to refinish the hardwood floors in the master bedroom for months, and Christmas seemed as good a time as any to start. I moved all the furniture into the hallway, rented a sander, and spent 8 hours stripping away years of accumulated wear until the original wood emerged, golden oak, beautiful and scarred and honest. By evening, my shoulders ached, and my hands were raw, and my mind was blessedly empty. I ordered Chinese food and ate it straight from the containers, standing at the kitchen counter, and I thought about nothing at all. At 9 p.m., my phone rang. Charles Bradford. I stared at the screen for a moment, then answered. John, Charles said, and he sounded tired, old. I hope I'm not disturbing you. Just refinishing some floors. A dry laugh. Of course you are. Listen, I owe you an apology. For last night. For all of it. That was unconscionable what Barbara did. It was, I agreed. I didn't know about Richard, about any of her plans. She told me she was introducing a friend of Natalie's, someone from work. I had no idea she was going to orchestrate that whole spectacle. I believed him. Charles had never been part of Barbara's machinations. He was too straightforward, too genuinely kind. It was one of the reasons I'd always liked him, even when I knew his family was bleeding me dry. I appreciate you saying that, I told him. I also wanted to thank you, he continued, for what you said about the money, the foundation work, the refinancing, all of it. Barbara had no idea how much you'd done for us. She didn't want to know. No, Charles agreed quietly. She didn't. And now she's furious. Not at herself, mind you, at you, for embarrassing the family, for making a scene, for having the audacity to point out that you're not some charity case we took pity on. I'm sure she'll get over it. I wouldn't count on it. Barbara doesn't do well with being wrong or being publicly corrected. He paused. Richard Ashford left this morning, by the way. Apparently after he learned that Natalie comes without the house or your business or any real assets of her own, he suddenly remembered a previous commitment in Boston. Very apologetic, very sudden. I felt a flicker of satisfaction, though I tried to suppress it. That must have been awkward. Natalie's devastated. Barbara's convinced it's your fault somehow for poisoning the well. Her exact words. Of course it is. John, I know this is difficult, but is there any chance you and Natalie could work this out? I'm not asking you to forget what happened, but maybe counseling or... No, I said firmly. Charles, I like you. I respect you. But Natalie made her choice. She chose Richard. She chose her mother's approval over our marriage. And even if Richard is gone now, that doesn't change what she did. He sighed. I understand. I do. But she's my daughter, and I have to ask. I know. We were quiet for a moment. For what it's worth, Charles said, I always thought you were good for her. You made her happy in a way I hadn't seen since she was young, before all the pressure of being a Bradford got to her. I tried, I said, but trying isn't enough. Your wife made that very clear. Barbara was wrong about a lot of things, and I'm sorry I didn't stand up to her sooner. I'm sorry I let things get this bad. It's not your fault, Charles. Isn't it? I knew what she was doing. The little comments about your job, the comparisons to other sons-in-law, the constant pressure on Natalie to do better. I saw it all, and I said nothing because it was easier than fighting with her. He sounded broken. I'm 68 years old, he continued, and I've spent 40 years being a coward when it comes to my wife. And now my daughter's marriage is over because I couldn't find the backbone to tell Barbara to leave well enough alone. Charles, I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I see it, what I did, what I didn't do, and I'm sorry. We sat with that for a moment, two men on opposite ends of a phone line, both caught in the wake of Barbara Bradford's ambitions. Take care of yourself, John, Charles finally said. And if you ever need anything, a reference, an investor, someone to vouch for you, you call me. Understand? I understand. Thank you. Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas, Charles. He hung up, and I was alone again with the smell of sawdust and the sound of silence. The divorce papers were served on December 27th. Marcus had worked fast, filing everything the day after Christmas. Natalie received them at her mother's house in Greenwich, delivered by a process server who apparently had to wait through 15 minutes of Barbara's outrage before Natalie would come to the door. Marcus called me afterward, laughing. The server said he's never been threatened with so many lawsuits in one conversation. Barbara Bradford apparently knows 11 different lawyers personally and promised to have his license revoked. Sounds about right, I said. Natalie took the papers without comment, signed the acknowledgement. No drama from her, at least. What's the timeline? We'll have a hearing in about 6 weeks to address the immediate issues: property division, the house, her removal from the premises. Then the actual divorce process will take several months, assuming she doesn't contest. She will, I said. Barbara won't let this go without a fight. Let her fight. We have everything documented. The house is yours. The business is yours. The only marital assets are her car, which you co-signed for but she made the payments on, and maybe some furniture and joint savings. We're talking $50,000, $60,000 at most. What about the money I gave her family? That's trickier. Legally, they were gifts unless we can prove they were loans with an expectation of repayment. I've gone through your documentation, and most of it could go either way. The foundation work, for instance. You did that at Mont, but you didn't charge them at all. Hard to claim it was a loan when there's no payment structure. So I'm just out $600,000. Not necessarily. If we can establish that these gifts were made under duress, or with the understanding that they were investments in your marriage, and that Natalie and her family took advantage of your generosity while she was conducting an affair, a judge might award you a larger share of the marital assets to compensate. There are no marital assets. You just said that. There's Natalie's future earning potential. Alimony could be reduced or eliminated entirely. That's worth something. It wasn't about the money, I realized. It had never really been about the money. It was about the principle, about not being treated like a doormat, about making sure that Barbara Bradford understood that she couldn't just discard me like I was nothing. Do what you can, I told Marcus. I want this handled right. You got it. Oh, and John, one more thing. I got a call from a lawyer representing the Bradford family. Guy named Whitmore, works at one of those white shoe firms in Manhattan. Already? Barbara doesn't waste time. He wanted to discuss terms for a mutually beneficial dissolution of marriage. His words. Which means they want to negotiate, probably offer you some money to go away quietly. Sign a non-disclosure agreement. Not embarrass the family any further. How much? He didn't say. Said he wanted to have a conversation first. Feel out your position. I thought about it. about Barbara Bradford trying to buy my silence, trying to turn my marriage into just another transaction she could manage. Tell him no, I said. No to the conversation, or no to whatever they're offering. No to all of it. I don't want their money. I don't want to negotiate. I want a clean divorce, my property protected, and I want to be done with this family. You sure? They might offer serious money. 6 figures, maybe more, just to keep quiet about the affair and the Christmas dinner incident. I'm sure I'm not interested in being paid off. Marcus was quiet for a moment. You know what? Good. Fuck 'em. We'll do this the right way. Thanks, Marcus. That's what you pay me for. Well, that and my winning personality. We hung up, and I went back to work on the floors. New Year's Eve arrived with freezing rain. I'd given Natalie until the end of the year to collect her things, and she'd been coming by in increments. An hour here, 2 hours there. Always when I wasn't home, always leaving the place slightly emptier than before. She took the obvious things, her clothes, her books, her laptop, the artwork she'd collected from the gallery where she used to work, the expensive espresso machine her mother had bought her for Christmas 3 years ago. She left the furniture we'd bought together, the dishes, the pots and pans, the memories embedded in every room. On the 31st, she came for the last time. I was home, deliberately. I wanted to see her face, wanted to make this real. She pulled up at 2 p.m. in a U-Haul truck, Preston driving. They worked for 3 hours, moving boxes and pieces of a life we'd shared. I watched from the kitchen window, not helping, not hindering, just bearing witness. At 5 o'clock, they were done. Natalie came to the door one last time. She looked different, thinner, older. Her eyes were hollow in a way that made me think she hadn't been sleeping. That's everything, she said. Okay. I left the key on the counter in the garage door opener. Thanks. We stood there, the space between us full of everything we weren't saying. I'm sorry, she finally whispered, for all of it, for hurting you, for letting Mom manipulate the situation, for not being brave enough to just tell you the truth. I know. Do you hate me? I considered the question. Did I hate her? Natalie Bradford, the woman I'd loved for 9 years. The woman who'd betrayed me with a stranger her mother approved of. The woman who'd let me be humiliated in front of her entire family because she was too weak to stand up to Barbara. No, I said honestly, I don't hate you. I pity you. She flinched. That's worse. Is it? You're 34 years old and you still can't make a decision without your mother's approval. You threw away a good marriage because Barbara told you to, and now you're moving back into her house because you have nowhere else to go. I have options, she said defensively. Do you? Because from where I'm standing, you just lost Richard, you lost this house, and you lost the life we were building together. All because you couldn't tell your mother no. Tears welled in her eyes. You don't understand what it's like being her daughter. The expectations, the pressure, the constant comparisons to everyone else. You're right, I agreed. I don't understand because I never had parents who made me feel like I wasn't good enough just by existing. And I never will understand why you let her do that to you. I can't change who I am, John. I never asked you to. I just asked you to choose me, to choose us. And when it mattered, you didn't. She looked down at her hands. I know, and I'll regret that for the rest of my life. Good, I said, and I meant bed. Maybe that regret will teach you something. Preston honked the horn of the U-Haul. Natalie looked back at him, then at me. Goodbye, John. Goodbye, Natalie. She walked down the path to the truck, climbed into the passenger seat, and didn't look back as they drove away. I stood in the doorway and watched them disappear down the street, and I felt the weight of 9 years lift off my shoulders. Then I went inside, locked the door, and started planning my future. January arrived with brutal clarity. The house felt different without Natalie's presence. Not empty exactly, more like a space that had been cleared for new growth. I walked through rooms that had been ours and started thinking of them as mine. The guest room became an office. The formal dining room we'd used maybe 10 times in 7 years became a workshop where I could plan projects and review blueprints. I threw myself into work. Hayes Construction had been doing well, but I'd been coasting for the past year, letting my project managers handle most of the day-to-day while I dealt with my crumbling marriage. Now I got back in the field. I showed up at job sites at 6 a.m. I worked alongside my crews. I met with clients personally instead of sending my VP of operations. And I started planning something bigger. My father had built the company on residential construction, custom homes, renovations, additions. We'd done well with it, but I'd always known there was a ceiling. Residential work was steady but small. If I wanted to really grow, I needed to move into commercial development, mixed-use properties, small apartment buildings, retail spaces. The Norwalk project I'd mentioned to Charles at Christmas was the beginning. A 6-unit mixed-use building, retail on the ground floor, apartments above. I'd bought the land 2 years ago with profit from a particularly successful year. I'd been sitting on it, waiting for the right time to develop. Now was the right time. I spent my evenings drawing up plans, researching zoning requirements, building pro formas to project costs and revenue. I met with architects and contractors and city officials. I put together a pitch deck that would make Marcus Chen proud. And then I did something I hadn't expected to do. I called Charles Bradford. He met me at a coffee shop in Westport on a gray Tuesday morning in mid-January. He looked older than he had at Christmas. The holidays had taken something out of him, left him diminished somehow. He ordered black coffee and sat across from me with the wary expression of a man who's learned that nothing comes without complications. "Thanks for meeting me," I said. "Of course. Your message said you had a business proposition?" I slid a folder across the table. Inside was my pitch deck for the Norwalk project. Architectural renderings, financial projections, market analysis showing the demand for exactly this kind of development in the area. Charles put on his reading glasses and spent 15 minutes going through every page. "This is good," he finally said. "Really good. Who put this together?" "I did, with help from my architect and my accountant." He looked at me over his glasses. "You're serious about this?" "Dead serious. I've got enough capital to break ground and get through the foundation work. But to finish it properly, on schedule, I need investors. Real investors who understand commercial real estate and won't micromanage the construction process." "How much are you looking for?" $2 million, which would give investors a 30% stake in the property. Based on my projections, it'll be worth $8 million when it's completed and leased. That's a substantial return in 18 months. Charles went back to the numbers, checking my math, questioning my assumptions. He asked smart questions about construction costs, about timeline, about what would happen if the market shifted during development. I answered every one. Finally, he sat back and removed his glasses. "Why me, John, after everything that's happened, after what my family did to you? Why bring this to me?" "Because you're good at this," I said simply. "Because you know commercial real estate better than anyone I've met. Because you understand risk and you understand return, and you won't invest in something unless you believe in it. And because I think you could use a win right now, something that's yours, not Barbara's, not the Bradford family legacy, just yours." He was quiet for a long moment. "She's made things very difficult," he finally said. "Barbara, since Christmas. She's convinced that you deliberately humiliated her, that you planned the whole thing, the house being in your name, the business, the money you tracked. She thinks you were always planning to leave Natalie and wanted to make her look foolish in the process. And what do you think? I think you're one of the most honest people I've ever met. I think you put up with more from my family than you should have. And I think my wife is so used to being the one who controls everything that she can't accept when someone refuses to be controlled." He tapped the folder. "This is good work, John, professional, thorough, and your projections are conservative, which I appreciate. Too many developers inflate their numbers to attract investors. So I'm going to think about it. I'll have my people review your materials. I'll run my own analysis. And if everything checks out," he smiled, "you might have yourself an investor." "I appreciate that, Charles. Don't thank me yet. I'm doing this because it's a good opportunity, not as a favor." He paused. Although I will admit it would give me enormous satisfaction to build something successful with you, while Barbara insists you're nothing but a common laborer. Petty revenge through commercial real estate development. I like it. He laughed, and it was the first genuine laugh I'd heard from him in months. We shook hands, and I left the coffee shop feeling lighter than I had since Christmas. The divorce hearing happened on a cold morning in February. Marcus and I sat on one side of a conference room in family court. Natalie and her lawyer, the expensive one from Manhattan, Whitmore, sat on the other. Barbara had tried to come, but the judge had been very clear that only parties to the divorce and their legal representatives were allowed. Whitmore was everything I'd expected. Mid-50s, impeccable suit, Harvard law ring, and the kind of condescending smile that said he'd won before we even started. He was wrong. The hearing lasted 2 hours. Whitmore argued that Natalie had contributed to the marriage in non-financial ways and deserved compensation for her role as my wife. He argued that the house, while purchased in my name, had become marital property through years of shared residence and should be split equally. He argued that I had taken advantage of Natalie's family's financial difficulties to position myself as indispensable, then used that leverage to humiliate them publicly. It was a good argument. Marcus's argument was better. He produced the deed to the house, clearly showing it was purchased before our marriage. He produced the business incorporation documents, showing Hayes Construction was a separate entity I'd started with inherited money. He produced our prenuptial agreement, which Natalie had signed willingly, that kept all separate properties separate in the event of divorce. Then he dropped the bomb. Your Honor, my client has evidence that Mrs. Hayes engaged in an extramarital affair beginning in September of last year and continuing until Christmas Eve, when my client discovered the affair during a family gathering. Whitmore's smile finally slipped. Marcus produced photographs, time-stamped images from social media showing Natalie and Richard Ashford at various events throughout the fall. Restaurant receipts charged to Natalie's credit card, the one I'd given her access to, for dinners for two at times when she told me she was out with friends from the gallery. Hotel bills. Hotel bills were the worst. Mrs. Hayes charged accommodations at the Greenwich Harbor Inn to a joint credit card on 5 separate occasions between October and December, Marcus said calmly. Each stay was midweek. Each stay was for one night. And according to the hotel's records, the rooms were booked for 2 guests. I watched Natalie's face crumble. I'd known about the affair. She'd admitted to it, but seeing it laid out like this, documented, time-stamped, undeniable, made it real in a way that confession never had. Whitmore tried to recover. Your Honor, while my client's actions are regrettable, they don't negate her right to equitable distribution of marital assets. There are no marital assets, the judge interrupted. She was a woman in her 60s with steel gray hair and no patience for bullshit. The house is Mr. Hayes' separate property. The business is his separate property. The only potentially marital assets are some furniture and approximately $60,000 in a joint savings account. But Your Honor, let me finish, Mr. Whitmore. The judge looked at the paperwork in front of her. Mr. Hayes is willing to let Mrs. Hayes keep the furniture they purchased together in her personal vehicle, which he co-signed for. He's willing to split the savings account 50-50. That's $30,000 each. Given that Mrs. Hayes conducted an affair while using marital funds to finance it, I'd say Mr. Hayes is being more than generous. She looked at Natalie. Mrs. Hayes, do you contest any of this? Natalie looked at Whitmore, who gave the slightest shake of his head. No, Your Honor, she whispered. Good. Then here's my ruling. The house at 47 Oak Hill Road remains Mr. Hayes' separate property, and Mrs. Hayes is ordered to remove herself and all personal belongings by March 1st. Hayes Construction remains Mr. Hayes' separate property. Furniture and household goods will be divided per the list submitted by both parties. Joint savings will be split equally. No alimony, no further claims on each other's property or income. The gavel came down. Divorce granted. You're both free to go. It was over. 9 years of marriage ended in a 2-hour hearing on a cold Tuesday morning. Natalie stood and walked out without looking at me. Whitmore followed, already on his phone, probably calling Barbara to explain how everything had gone to shit. Marcus clapped me on the shoulder. Congratulations, you're a free man. Thanks. Drinks tonight to celebrate? I thought about it, about sitting in a bar with my lawyer, celebrating the end of my marriage, about going home to my empty house, about all the ways people mark the passage from one life to another. Rain check, I said. I've got work to do. And I did. Spring arrived like a reprieve. The snow melted, the trees budded, the world turned green again, and I felt like I was emerging from a long winter of my own. The Norwalk project broke ground in March. Charles Bradford came through with his investment, $2 million, exactly as I'd requested. He showed up at the groundbreaking ceremony with a hard hat and a genuine smile, and he worked a crowd of city officials and contractors like he'd been doing this his whole life, which, I suppose, he had. This is good, he told me as we watched the excavators dig the foundation. Building something new, starting fresh, I'd forgotten what this feels like. What does it feel like? Like I'm alive again. He looked at me. Thank you for that, John, for giving me this opportunity. Thank you for taking a chance on it. We stood there in the morning sun, watching the earth move, and I thought about all the ways life could surprise you. 6 months ago, I'd been married to his daughter, quietly miserable in a relationship that was dying by inches. Now I was divorced, free, and building something with her father. Life was strange. Construction on the Norwalk building proceeded faster than I'd anticipated. My crews were good, the best I'd ever hired, and they worked with the kind of efficiency that comes from experience and pride in their craft. By May, we had the foundation poured and the framing started. By June, the structure was taking shape, rising out of the earth like a promise of something better. I spent most of my days on site working alongside my guys. I'd forgotten how much I loved this. The physical act of building, of taking raw materials and turning them into something solid and real. There's a satisfaction in construction that you don't get from paperwork or management. Every nail driven, every wall raised, every system installed is tangible proof that you're making something that will outlast you. My personal life remained quiet. I didn't date. Didn't even try. I wasn't ready for that. I was still processing the end of my marriage, still figuring out who I was outside of being Natalie's husband. Instead, I focused on work, on the house, on building the life I wanted instead of the life I thought I was supposed to want. I heard about Natalie through the grapevine. She'd moved back in with Barbara, which surprised no one. She'd taken a job at a different gallery in Manhattan, something her mother had arranged through one of her connections. She was seeing someone new, not Richard Ashford, who had apparently returned to Boston and gotten engaged to someone from an old shipping family, but someone else from the right social circles. I didn't care. That was the strangest part. I'd spent 9 years loving Natalie Bradford, and now I felt nothing when I heard her name. Not anger, not longing, not even curiosity, just nothing. It was freeing. In July, Barbara Bradford called me. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me, and I picked up on the fourth ring. "Jonathan," she said, and her voice was like ice wrapped in velvet. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." "I'm on a job site, Barbara. What do you want?" "I want to talk. In person. There are some matters we should discuss." "We have nothing to discuss." "I think we do. I'm prepared to make you a very generous offer, one that I think you'll find interesting." I almost hung up, but something in her tone made me pause. This wasn't the Barbara who'd humiliated me at Christmas. This was someone else, someone who needed something. "What kind of offer?" "Not over the phone. Meet me for lunch. Tomorrow. 1 o'clock at the Ocean House in Westport." The Ocean House, of course. Neutral territory, expensive enough to be impressive, public enough to be safe. "Fine," I said. 1 o'clock. "Thank you, Jonathan. I look forward to it." She hung up before I could change my mind. I arrived at the Ocean House 5 minutes early and found Barbara already seated at a corner table with a view of the water. She looked immaculate as always. White linen pants, navy blazer, pearls. But there was something different in her eyes. Something that might have been worry if Barbara Bradford was capable of such a mundane emotion. "Jonathan," she said as I sat down, "thank you for coming. Let's skip the pleasantries. What do you want?" A waiter appeared and Barbara ordered a salad and sparkling water. I ordered a burger and iced tea. We sat in silence until he left. You've been working with Charles, Barbara said. I have. The Norwalk project. I've heard it's going well. It is. He's invested quite a bit of money in it, his own money, not family money. I said nothing. Jonathan, I'm going to be direct with you because I think you appreciate directness. I made a mistake at Christmas. The way I handled the situation with Natalie and Richard was inappropriate. I embarrassed you, I underestimated you, and I'm prepared to make amends. I leaned back in my chair. How generous. I'm serious. I'm prepared to offer you $250,000 to sign a non-disclosure agreement regarding what happened at our Christmas gathering. You would agree not to discuss the incident publicly, not to disparage the Bradford family in any way, and not to discuss the details of your divorce from Natalie. You're trying to buy my silence. I'm trying to protect my family's reputation. Surely you can understand that. The waiter brought our drinks. I took a long sip of iced tea before responding. No. Barbara's perfect composure slipped for just a second. Excuse me? No, I'm not interested in your money. I'm not interested in signing anything. And I'm especially not interested in pretending that what you did was just a mistake that can be fixed with a check. Jonathan, be reasonable. I am being reasonable. You publicly humiliated me. You tried to force me out of my own house. You manipulated your daughter into an affair because you thought you could trade her up for a better model. And now that it's all blown up in your face, you want to pay me to forget about it? $250,000 is a significant amount of money. I don't care. I don't want it. What I want is for you to leave me alone. Stop calling me. Stop trying to manage me. And definitely stop trying to use your money to make your problems disappear. Barbara's eyes went cold. I could make things very difficult for you, Jonathan. I have connections, resources. You could what? I leaned forward. Blackball me from contracts? I work in construction, Barbara, not high society. My clients care about whether I can build what they need on time and on budget. They don't care who I've offended at Greenwich cocktail parties. Charles is an adult who makes his own decisions, and he decided to invest in my project because it's a good investment, not because of some family obligation. If you have a problem with that, take it up with him. Our food arrived. The burger looked perfect. I took a bite while Barbara sat frozen across from me. You're making a mistake, she finally said. No, I replied. I made a mistake 9 years ago when I married your daughter, but I'm done making mistakes where your family's concerned. I stood up, pulled out my wallet, and dropped $60 on the table. That should cover my lunch and the tip. Enjoy your salad, Barbara. I walked out of the restaurant and into the summer sun, and I felt lighter than I had in years. Behind me, I could almost hear the sound of Barbara Bradford's world cracking. The rest of the summer passed in a blur of productivity. The Norwalk building went vertical. We hit every deadline, stayed under budget. The retail spaces started leasing before we'd even finished construction. A coffee shop, a boutique fitness studio, a wine bar. The apartments above were drawing interest from young professionals who wanted to live in a walkable neighborhood without the Manhattan price tag. Charles came by the site regularly, not to micromanage but to observe, to learn, to remember what it felt like to build something from the ground up instead of just managing investments on paper. One afternoon in August, he found me on the second floor reviewing the electrical plans with my foreman. Got a minute? He asked. We walked out to what would eventually be a balcony overlooking the street. The view was better than I'd anticipated. You could see all the way to the water on a clear day. I wanted to thank you, Charles said, for this, for including me, for giving me something to care about again. You're an investor. Of course I included you. It's more than that. He looked out at the view. I've spent the last 20 years managing other people's properties. Making money, sure, but not building anything. Not creating anything. I'd forgotten what this feels like. The satisfaction of seeing something rise out of nothing. It's a good feeling. It is. He turned to me. I want in on your next project, whatever it is, not as a passive investor, as a partner. Someone who's involved in the planning, the execution, all of it. I studied him. Charles Bradford, asking to be my partner. 6 months ago, he'd been the father-in-law who couldn't stand up to his wife. Now he was someone different, someone who'd found his spine. I'm planning a project in Stamford, I said. Bigger than this. 12 units, more commercial space. It's ambitious. Good, I like ambitious. It's also riskier. If the market shifts, we could be in trouble. Then we'll be in trouble together. He extended his hand. Partners? I shook it. Partners. September arrived with the kind of crisp air that makes you believe in new beginnings. The Norwalk building was nearly complete. Just finishing touches now. Final inspections, punch list items, landscaping. We were ahead of schedule and under budget, which almost never happens in construction, but had happened this time through a combination of good planning, good crews, and good luck. Charles and I were in talks with banks about financing for the Stamford project. The numbers were bigger, $8 million in total costs, requiring $4 million in investor capital. But our success in Norwalk had given us credibility, and banks were interested. My personal life remained quiet, which was exactly how I wanted it. I'd refinished all the floors in the house, painted the rooms, replaced the furniture Natalie had taken with pieces I actually liked. The place felt like mine now in a way it never had when we were married. Every corner, every wall, every piece reflected my taste, my choices, my life. One evening in mid-September, I was sitting on the back patio with a beer, watching the sunset, when my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Hello? John, it's Natalie. I hadn't heard her voice in 7 months. It sounded smaller than I remembered. Uncertain. What do you want, Natalie? I wanted to call and tell you something. I'm getting married. I felt nothing. Congratulations. His name is Trevor Cabot. He's from Boston. His family knows Mom's family. We met at a charity thing in June. That's great. I hope you're happy. I wanted you to hear it from me before you saw it somewhere or heard through someone else. I appreciate that. Silence stretched between us. Are you okay? She finally asked. I heard about the Norwalk project. It looks amazing. It is amazing. We're almost done. Already leased out completely. That's good. I'm glad. You deserve good things, John. Thanks. More silence. I'm sorry, she said. I know I've said that before, but I mean it. For everything. For not being brave enough to be honest with you. For letting Mom control everything. For throwing away what we had. It's in the past, Natalie. Is it? Because I think about it all the time. About us, about what I gave up. Don't, I said gently. Don't do that to yourself. You made your choice. You are moving forward. That's good. Keep moving forward. Are you? Moving forward? I looked around my patio, at my house, at the life I'd built in the aftermath of our marriage. Yeah, I said, I am. Good. That's good. Natalie, be happy with Trevor. Actually happy. Not just going through the motions to please your mother. Life's too short for that. She laughed, but it sounded like crying. I'll try. Good luck. You too, John, you too. She hung up and I sat there with my beer as the sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and gold. I thought about Natalie getting married again, about her finding someone new, about her trying to build a life that would satisfy both her mother's expectations and her own desires. I hope she succeeded, but I didn't spend too much time thinking about it. I had my own life to build. October brought the grand opening of the Norwalk project. We called it Bradford Hayes Commons. Charles had insisted on the name, said it represented our partnership. I'd agreed, though I'd made sure my name came second. Let the Bradford name draw attention. My work would speak for itself. The opening was a small affair. Local politicians, future tenants, some press from the regional papers. Nothing like the elaborate parties Barbara Bradford threw, but it felt more real because of that. These were people who cared about what we'd built, not just about being seen at the right event. Charles gave a speech about vision and partnership and the importance of smart development. I gave a shorter speech about quality construction and community building. The coffee shop owner handed out samples. The fitness studio offered free trial classes. The wine bar poured tastings. It was perfect. As the evening wound down, I found Charles standing in the courtyard we'd created in the center of the complex. A small green space with benches and trees and lighting that would make it usable after dark. "We did good," he said. "We did. Your father would be proud. Building something that lasts, creating value beyond just profit." I'd told Charles about my father during one of our site visits, about how he'd built the company from nothing, about how he'd taught me that construction wasn't just about putting up buildings. It was about creating spaces where people would live their lives. "I think he would be, I said. "What's next for you, John, besides Stanford?" "I don't know. Keep building. Keep growing the company. Maybe branch out into other markets." "Big ambitions." "Why not? Life's too short to play small." He smiled. "Indeed it is." A woman approached us, mid-30s, dressed in casual business attire, with an easy smile and intelligent eyes. "Mr. Hayes, I'm Sarah Chen. I write for the Connecticut Post. I was wondering if I could ask you a few questions about the project." "Of course." Charles excused himself, and Sarah pulled out a notebook. "This is really impressive work," she said, looking around. "Mixed-use development is tricky. A lot of projects like this feel either too commercial or too residential. But you've found a nice balance." That was the goal. Create a space where people can live and work and socialize without having to get in their car. "How did you get into development? Your background is residential construction, right?" I told her about my father, about building Hayes Construction, about wanting to create something bigger. She asked smart questions, took detailed notes, and seemed genuinely interested in the story. "In the partnership with Charles Bradford?" she asked. "That's interesting, given that you were married to his daughter." Word had gotten around, apparently. Charles is a savvy investor with decades of experience in commercial real estate. He saw value in what I was doing and wanted to be part of it. Our personal history is separate from our professional partnership. That must have been awkward, though. The divorce was pretty public, from what I understand. It was what it was. We're both adults. We moved on. She studied me for a moment, then closed her notebook. "Off the record, I think it's impressive that you managed to turn what could have been a terrible situation into something productive. A lot of people would have let bitterness poison everything." "Bitterness is a waste of energy," I said. "I'd rather build something new than dwell on what I lost." She smiled. "That's a good quote. Mind if I use it?" "Go ahead." The article ran 3 days later. It was fair, thorough, and made both me and Charles look good. It talked about the project's innovative design, its quick lease-up, its potential to revitalize the neighborhood. It quoted me on building for the future, not the past. Barbara Bradford reportedly threw the newspaper across her breakfast room when she read it. I know this because Charles told me, laughing so hard he could barely breathe. "She called me a traitor," he said, "for going into business with you, for putting the Bradford name on a building you designed. For," and I quote, "consorting with the enemy." What did you say? I told her that John Hayes isn't my enemy. He's my partner. And if she can't accept that, she's welcome to sleep in the guest room until she comes to her senses. I laughed. You didn't. I did. First time I've stood up to her in, hell, I can't remember how long. Felt good. How's that working out for you? She moved into the guest room, but she's also started speaking to me again, which is progress. In her own way, she's trying to adapt to the new reality, which is that I'm not just her husband. I'm my own person, with my own interests and my own business partnerships. He grinned. It's revolutionary, really. November brought complications. The Stanford project was moving forward, but we'd hit a snag with zoning. The city wanted us to include more parking than our design allowed for. Adding parking meant reducing units, which meant reducing revenue, which meant the whole financial model needed to be reworked. Charles and I spent 3 weeks going back and forth with the city, with our architects, with our financial advisors. We ran a dozen different scenarios. We looked at alternative designs. We explored parking structures versus surface parking versus reducing the commercial space. Finally, we found a solution, a compact mechanical parking system that could fit more cars in less space. It was more expensive up front, but allowed us to keep our unit count while satisfying the city's requirements. Crisis averted, but it reminded me that development was different from construction. Construction, I could control. I had good crews, good subcontractors, good systems. Development meant dealing with municipalities, neighbors, market forces, financing. It meant navigating complexity that was beyond my expertise. I needed help. I found it in an unexpected place. Her name was Rachel Torres, and she was a development consultant who'd worked on projects all over the Northeast. She was 42, whip smart, and had a reputation for turning troubled projects into successes. She was also expensive. Her retainer alone was $50,000. I hired her anyway. Your problem, she said after reviewing the Stamford project, is that you're thinking like a builder, which is good for the building part, but development is about relationships with the city, with lenders, with future tenants. You need to build those relationships the same way you build your buildings, with intention and care. She was right. Over the next 2 months, Rachel taught me how to navigate city politics, how to build coalitions with neighborhood groups, how to present projects in ways that address community concerns while still being profitable, how to turn potential opponents into advocates. It was like learning a new language, but I was good at learning and I was motivated. By the end of the year, we had all our permits for Stamford. We had our financing locked in. We had a construction timeline that would put us in the ground by March. Hayes Construction was becoming Hayes Development, and I was becoming someone I barely recognized, a developer, an entrepreneur, a businessman who could navigate boardrooms as easily as job sites. My father would have been proud, or maybe confused, probably both. Christmas arrived with snow and clarity. I spent Christmas Eve alone in my house, cooking a dinner for one and watching old movies. I didn't feel lonely. I felt content, like I'd finally found my footing after a year of stumbling around in the dark. Charles invited me to spend Christmas Day with him. Not at the Greenwich estate. He and Barbara had separated in October, though they hadn't made it public, but at a condo he'd rented in Stamford while they figured things out. Natalie will be there, he warned, with Trevor. If that's uncomfortable, it's fine, I said, really. And it was. Christmas Day was small, just Charles, Natalie, Trevor, and me. We ate Chinese food and played board games and carefully avoided talking about anything substantial. Natalie was quieter than I remembered, less animated. Trevor seemed nice enough, polite, well-educated, appropriately deferential to Charles. He was also boring, but he seemed to make Natalie happy, or at least content, and that was enough. At one point, Natalie and I found ourselves alone in Charles's small kitchen, refilling drinks. "You look good," she said. "Happy." "I am happy." "The business is going well?" "Very well. We're starting a bigger project in Stamford, 12 units. It'll be double the size of Norwalk." "That's amazing, John. I'm really proud of you." I looked at her, this woman I'd loved and lost, and I felt gratitude for the years we'd had, for the lessons I'd learned, for the man I'd become after it ended. "I'm proud of you too," I said, "for finding someone who makes you happy." "He's not you," she said quietly. "That's probably a good thing. You and I, we were never going to work long term. We wanted different things, needed different things." "I know." She smiled, and it was sad, but genuine. "But I'm glad you were my husband for a while, even if it ended badly." "Me too." Trevor called for her from the living room, and she squeezed my hand before walking away. I stood in the kitchen for a moment, feeling the weight of the past year settle into something like peace. Then I rejoined the group, and we spent the rest of the evening playing a Scrabble and laughing at Charles's terrible jokes, and it was the best Christmas I'd had in years. The new year arrived with purpose. January was consumed with final preparations for the Stamford project. February, we broke ground. By March, we were pouring foundations. By summer, we were vertical. The project was bigger, more complex, more expensive than Norwalk. It was also more rewarding. Every challenge we solved, every system we installed, every detail we got right was proof that Hayes Development wasn't a fluke. We were building a real company with real capabilities and real value. Rachel Torres proved invaluable. She taught me how to build relationships with city council members, how to navigate community meetings, how to turn potential opponents into allies. She taught me the language of development, IRR and cap rates and debt service coverage ratios, until I could talk to bankers and investors with confidence. Most importantly, she taught me that development was about more than just buildings. It was about creating value for communities, about understanding what neighborhoods needed and delivering it in a way that was sustainable and profitable. "You're good at this," she told me one afternoon as we reviewed leasing projections. "Better than you realize. You have a gift for understanding what people want before they know they want it." That's just paying attention. Most developers don't. They build what they think will make money, not what communities actually need. You do both. She paused, then said something that surprised me. "Have you ever thought about the teaching? Sharing what you know?" "Teaching what?" "Development, construction management, how to build sustainable projects that serve communities. There are programs at universities, continuing education courses. You have knowledge that's valuable." I'd never considered it, but the idea stuck with me. In June, I got a call from the University of Connecticut. They were starting a new program in real estate development and construction management. They were looking for adjunct professors with practical experience. Someone had recommended me. "We understand you've had significant success with mixed-use development," the department chair said. "We'd love to have you teach a seminar on sustainable development practices." "I'm not an academic," I warned. "We don't want academics. We want practitioners, people who know what actually works in the field." I agreed to teach one class that fall, just to try it. It changed everything. The students were hungry for practical knowledge. They didn't want theory. They wanted to know how to actually build things, how to navigate permitting, how to work with contractors, how to make projects pencil out financially while still serving community needs. I taught them everything I knew, and in teaching them, I learned something about myself. I was good at this, at explaining complex concepts, at breaking down problems into manageable pieces, at inspiring people to think bigger about what was possible. By the end of the semester, the department chair asked me to teach 2 classes the following term. I agreed. The Stamford project completed in October, ahead of schedule and under budget. We had a grand opening that dwarfed the Norwalk event. State politicians showed up. The mayor gave a speech. The local news covered it. Charles and I stood in the courtyard we'd created, larger than Norwalk's, with a fountain and mature trees and benches where residents were already gathering. And we watched what we'd built come to life. "This is really something," Charles said. "It is. Your father would be proud. I hope you know that." I looked up at the building, at the lights coming on in the apartments as residents moved in, at the retail spaces filling with the sounds of commerce and community. "I think he would be," I said, "not because it's big or profitable, but because it's good, because it's something that will last." "That's the best legacy," Charles agreed. "Building things that outlast us." He was right, but I was beginning to realize that my legacy wasn't just buildings. It was also the students I was teaching, the knowledge I was sharing, the next generation of developers and builders I was helping to shape. That mattered more than I'd expected. In November, Barbara Bradford requested a meeting. Not for lunch this time, not with lawyers or agendas. "Just a conversation," she said. I almost said no, but Charles asked me to give her a chance. "She's different," he said. "The separation has changed her, made her think about things." So I agreed to meet her at a neutral coffee shop in Fairfield. She arrived on time, looking older than I remembered. The steel had gone out of her posture. She looked tired. "Jonathan," she said, "thank you for coming." "Charles asked me to." "I know." She ordered tea. I ordered coffee. We sat in an uncomfortable silence until our drinks arrived. "I owe you an apology," she finally said. I waited. "What I did at Christmas last year was unforgivable. The way I treated you, the way I orchestrated that entire humiliation, it was cruel and it was wrong. Yes, it was. I've spent the past year trying to understand why I did it, why I was so determined to push you out of Natalie's life. And I think it was because you were everything I taught her not to value." I sipped my coffee. "You were self-made," she continued. You built something from nothing. You didn't need our family's name or connections or money. You were independent, and that terrified me. Why? Because independence means you couldn't be controlled. And I've spent my entire life controlling things. My image, my family, my social position, everything. She looked down at her tea. But you can't control people like you, Jonathan. You make your own way. And when I couldn't control you, I tried to eliminate you. That's honest, at least. I'm trying to be honest. Probably for the first time in decades. She met my eyes. I destroyed my daughter's marriage because I was arrogant and controlling and terrified of losing my grip on my family. And in doing so, I've lost Charles. I've damaged my relationship with Natalie. I've become someone I don't recognize. What do you want from me, Barbara? Nothing. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm not asking you to forget what happened. I just wanted you to know that I see what I did, and I'm sorry. We sat there for a long moment. I appreciate you saying that, I finally said. I do, but an apology doesn't undo what happened. I know. And I'm not interested in being part of your family again. Not in any capacity. I understand. I stood to leave, then paused. Barbara, for what it's worth, I hope you figure things out. With Charles, with yourself, because the person you were at that Christmas dinner, she wasn't happy. She was just in control. She looked up at me with tears in her eyes. You're right, she whispered. I haven't been happy in a very long time. I left her there with her tea and her regrets, and I walked out into the November sunshine feeling lighter than I'd felt in years. I'd forgiven her, not because she deserved it, but because I deserved to be free of the anger. December arrived with snow and satisfaction. The year had been extraordinary. 2 successful developments, a thriving construction company, a new career teaching, new partnerships, new possibilities. I spent Christmas Eve the same way I'd spent the previous one, alone in my house, cooking for one, watching old movies. But this time, it felt like a choice rather than a circumstance. On Christmas morning, I drove to Charles's condo. He'd invited a small group, just me, Natalie, Trevor, and surprisingly, Barbara. They were trying to reconcile, he told me, going to couples therapy, learning how to communicate. It was slow and painful, but they were trying. Barbara was subdued in a way I'd never seen. Polite, careful. She asked about my teaching, about my projects, and she actually listened to the answers. At one point, she pulled me aside. I've been talking to my therapist about you, she said. Should I be concerned? A ghost of a smile. She says I projected all my fears about inadequacy onto you. Made you represent everything I was afraid of. Self-sufficiency, authenticity, independence from social approval. Sounds like expensive therapy. Very expensive. She paused. But she's right. You threatened me because you didn't need what I had to offer. And people like me don't know how to handle that. People like you. People who measure worth by social position instead of character. I looked at her, really looked at her, and I saw something I'd never seen before. Vulnerability, genuine, unguarded vulnerability. We're all trying to figure it out, I said. Some of us just take longer than others. She nodded. Thank you for giving me the chance to apologize. For not making this harder than it needed to be. Life's too short for carrying grudges. We rejoined the group, and we spent Christmas Day together. A strange, slightly awkward collection of people bound by history and hurt and the slow, tentative work of healing. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and real was enough. The snowfall on Christmas Eve 3 years after that terrible dinner at Barbara's estate was gentle and forgiving. I stood at the window of my house, the same house, though it had been expanded now with an addition I'd built myself, and watched the flakes drift down through the street lights. Behind me, the house was full of sound. Rachel Torres was in the kitchen with her wife Maria, putting together a cheese board. Charles was by the fireplace and telling stories to a group that included my project managers, several former students, and Sarah Chen, the reporter who'd covered our first project and who'd become a friend. In the corner, Natalie sat with Trevor and their infant daughter. She caught my eye and smiled, a real smile, genuine and warm, free of the sadness that had haunted her for years. Barbara was there too, sitting with Charles, quieter than she'd once been, but more present. She'd sold the Greenwich estate a year ago, downsized to something manageable. She volunteered now, teaching art history at a community center. She'd told me once that it was the first time in her life she'd done something that didn't come with social currency attached. Good turnout, Rachel said, joining me at the window with a glass of wine. You throw a hell of a Christmas party for someone who spent 2 years celebrating alone. Things change. They do. Speaking of which, have you made a decision about the Hartford project? I'd been offered a chance to develop a major mixed-use complex in Hartford's downtown. It would be the biggest project I'd ever taken on. 20 units, significant commercial space, a complicated financing structure, and major community impact. I'm going to do it, I said, but I want to bring in some of my former students as junior partners. Give them real equity, let them learn by doing. That's risky. They're inexperienced. So was I once. Someone took a chance on me. I gestured to Charles. Time to pay it forward. Rachel smiled. Your father really would be proud, you know. Not just of what you've built, but of who you've become. I hope so. The doorbell rang. I opened it to find Marcus Chen standing there with a woman I didn't recognize. Younger, beautiful, carrying a bottle of wine and wearing an engagement ring. John, this is Amanda. Amanda, John Hayes, the man responsible for approximately 60% of my billable hours. We all laughed and they came inside, joining the warmth and the noise and the celebration of a life rebuilt. Later, when everyone had gone home and I was cleaning up alone in the quiet house, I found myself back at that window, looking out at the snow. 3 years ago, I'd stood in Barbara Bradford's dining room and had my marriage end in spectacular fashion. I'd been humiliated, exposed, made to feel small, but I'd walked out of that house knowing exactly who I was and what I owned. And from that moment of clarity, I'd built something real. Not just buildings, though those mattered, but relationships, knowledge, community, legacy. I'd built a life that was mine on my terms, with people I chose and values I believed in. The house was mine, the business was mine, the future was mine, and that was worth more than all the approval Barbara Bradford could ever offer. I finished cleaning, turned off the lights, and went upstairs to bed. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new projects, new opportunities to build something that would last. But tonight I would sleep in my house, in my bed, surrounded by the life I'd created from the ruins of my marriage. And I would sleep well, because I knew finally and completely that I was enough, just as I was, just as I'd always been. The room wasn't frozen anymore. I'd thawed it with the warmth of my own truth, and I'd never be cold again.